Just 2 months after the Kennedy assassination, the teenage culture of the most distinct and studied generation in history was introduced to the phenomena of the Beatles. Like an innocent child groping in the dark, or a lonely pedestrian caught suddenly in a high wind, will grasp for the first support they come upon. The Beatles were given to baby boomers as a parent would give a nipple to a distraught child. The introduction of a prescribed cultural shift, precipitated by a pacifying trauma, was nothing new to the social engineers. Carried out for thousands of years in multiple civilizations, and with varying degrees of sophistication, the present psychological technocracy had been honing the practice for decades in the Soviet Union. It was brought to a fine point in the brutal remolding of the shell-shocked collective mind of post-war Germany with the Morgenthau Plan, and had been carried out with a more subtle but no less effective design in the United States since 1945. With the advent of the atom bomb came the realization that humanity's existence was not in the hands of a benevolent deity any longer. The horror of World War II and the possibility of total annihilation without exception created a blank slate, a cultural Big Bang. In fact, the term Big Bang was coined in 1949, which the social engineers could use to formulate an artificial genesis process and use it to implement gradually and deliberately a 50-year plan of degeneration. The goal of this agenda was to bring the West to a homogeneous state of subjection to a global cabal thousands of years old. In the 50 years previous to the end of the war, the cultural alchemists had patiently prepared the ground by infiltrating the foundations, institutions, and universities of countries that had previously excluded them. Beginning with cries of discrimination and once gaining a foothold using nepotism, they gradually took over the nodes of power that had heretofore nurtured a society dedicated to a freedom and progress unmatched in known history. We have been conditioned to believe that the factors with the most influence on our day-to-day lives are those involving economics and politics. Before the second half of the 20th century, this was certainly true, and the influence of media could be seen as peripheral and subsidiary to the forces of big business and government. Yet along with the advent of new forms of media like radio and cinema, with recording innovations and cheaper methods for mass production of printed material, came an increasing monopoly of this media by the cabal mentioned above. Publishing houses, movie studios, the creation and promotion of popular music, all of these came under the undeniable control of a small tribe who had been hammered for millennia with the idea that the rest of the world, considered animals in their religion's caste system, was there to serve them. The motto of RCA, the Recording Corporation of America, quote, "His Master's Voice," printed above the classic logo of a dog with its ear to an antique record horn, becomes less enigmatic in this light. RCA would later morph into a subsidiary of defense industry giant EMI, owner of the Beatles' own Capitol Records. This instance of an alliance between the defense and recording industries certainly throws light on the fact that all of these forms of media were seen by the tribe as weapons in an arsenal they would use in nothing less than the destruction of Western civilization and the formation of a new humanity totally disconnected from its divine self. The use of trauma to initiate cultural change is only one of many methods, and a comparatively simple one, used to manipulate and bring a people into position for the next phase of an ongoing operation. But the example of the Beatles and how their introduction was used in conjunction with the assassination is one I use here because this particular point in the 50-year plan, truly one of major significance that there would be no return from, involves so many elements that characterize the overall progression of inorganic devolution. The drawing into position of the subject population by the appearance of positivity and good feeling, the use of symbol and deep imagery that speaks to the subject on subconscious levels, content that is predictive of later phases of the operation, and occult or shadow language and symbol intelligible only to those on board with the plan and used in an almost mocking manner. The manipulation of organic and the formulation of artificial cultural cycles plays a prominent part in this particular instance, and is one of the overall themes of the content which follows. Far from being a cold clinical exposition of the technology of social engineering, devoid of personal sentiment, on the contrary, my documentation of this tragic experiment, inflicted upon the most innocent, the most unwary, is highly personal, not only for myself, a lifelong student of this project and totally lacking in academic indoctrination, but for my family, my nation, my race, humanity as a whole. The consequences affect not just those generations alive during this 50-year plan, but will alter the lives of generations hundreds of years into the future, unless humanity awakens to the massive crime perpetrated against it in the relatively short time period detailed in this work. Hundreds of millions of lives destroyed, not only in the massive wars of transition waged in part to bring mankind to a more malleable position and destroy the best and brightest, but also the victims of the intentional cultural degeneration. These include the broken casualties of the sexual revolution, the depraved murders and rapes fueled by pornography's bottomless whirlpool of dehumanizing objectification and limitless sadism. The victims usually society's most innocent. The consumers of the smut should of course be counted among those victims, the broken families, the young men and women who lose sexual function, the tens of millions, victims of the drug trade and its tentacles, including the government-sanctioned halls of torture we call prisons. The endless list of societal maladies could fill volume after volume. It was not easy to maintain a straight course once I accepted the responsibility of chronicling, to the best of my abilities, this trail of carnage. So many stories deserve to be told, so many dark side paths to be explored, where I could but place an exit sign to an off-ramp. Hopefully this work will open a Pandora's box for other truth seekers. The destruction of individual lives, as painful, as torturous as those losses are but one side of the horror. Physical wounds heal. The innocent soul returns in the pure life of the newborn. It is the twisting of the collective mind of man over generations, the alienation from his true self, the atomization of humanity that is the true horror. What is being discussed here is truly a cultural alchemy, the intentional degradation of man from gold to lead, from divinity to decay, the path from individual beauty in the kaleidoscopic expression of the source of all life, to homogeneity and slavery to the basest of our desires. Why this was done is simple to explain. In a word, greed. Not just for material wealth as they would have us believe, but for power. Not just for an individual, but for a tribe, who truly epitomizes the racial supremacy they project on their enemy. My purpose is to explain how. How did our families fall apart? How did our society fall apart? How did our culture get turned on its head, not just once, but over and over again? How was the wool pulled over most of our eyes so deftly that most thought these changes were only occurring to them, while they were clearly happening to their neighbors? My hope is that through this exposition, you can come to an understanding of some of the tragedies of your life. That they were not your fault, not your parents' fault, not your children's fault. My deepest wish is that you can forgive yourself and your loved ones, that you can come to an understanding of the distorted streets and blind alleys you spent most of your life in, and begin walking in the true path of your immortal soul. The truth is that in reality the tribe is only a reflection of our own materialism. They survive as they are only because we fall victim to our own base desires and addictions, which they profit from. It is not only our salvation for which we strive, but mankind as a whole. Many of the components of what will be touched on have been explored thoroughly in other works. The promotion of base sexuality for social control, Libido Dominandi, E. Michael Jones. The domination and manipulation of psychology and anthropology by the tribe in the early 20th century, The Culture of Critique, MacDonald. The link between the defense industry and popular music, signified by the extreme prevalence of the children of high-level military and intelligence families in the rock bands of the 60s counterculture, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, McGowan, and a plethora of other works detailing the methods of technocracy and social engineering at a scientific utilitarian level. What I am attempting is something deeper: the application of occult knowledge, natural law, the tenets of theosophy or the wisdom religion, to the twisting, mimicking, and ultimately the reversal of the collective spiritual evolutionary path of humanity at this stage of civilization. It is only by mirroring, by baiting the masses with deep truth, that they can be manipulated so thoroughly and completely. Only a tiny few, who were lucky enough to have escaped the heavy childhood conditioning most are subject to, are able to get a glimpse past these veils raised by a careful sorcery. Most will be totally unfamiliar with many of the concepts I elaborate here. Hopefully, by the use of analogy and correspondence, signposts along the path of occult knowledge, these concepts will precipitate on receptive minds. It will take some effort on your part, an open, unassuming, and non-prejudicial cognition, so rare among a mentally anesthetized population, and an ability to read between the lines must be utilized. Lastly, to be able to fearlessly examine yourself in the light of these revelations must be cultivated if this work is to achieve what I so greatly desire for my fellow beings: a healthy clarity that cleanses your true self of the grime and mire artificially imposed on you through the vicious, unwavering strategies of a small, sad tribe. It is natural to have material attachments, passions, desires that dim our inner sight on our soul's journey through materiality. It is, in effect, both the blatant and subtle exploitation of these weaknesses, common to all embodied souls, that is hopefully made clear. Because this subject is so vast and takes in so many disciplines and channels of operation, to avoid losing ourselves in endless and numerous rabbit holes, I will be concentrating on the mass media in general, and popular music specifically. They will be used to present a constant, devolving thread, which can be returned to for continuity. Sound being the most primal of senses, the word creating form, and therefore of the most occult significance. It is not only for the purpose of convenience that music will be of primary importance. The primal effect of sound on human attitude and behavior was obviously recognized by the tribe, despite their concerted and repeated efforts to downplay the effects. These efforts went as far as the halls of Congress, with the Carnival of Mockery, which was the Parents Music Resource Center hearings in the mid-'80s. This fiasco was the final nail in the coffin for any discussion of the attack on adolescent population of the West through popular music, and cleared the way for the perpetration of the basest and most demeaning cultural shift in American history. This shift was accomplished by a reformation using sound. Again, it is through a mirroring, and where needed a reversal of natural law, that the plan is accomplished. It must be stressed that it is not my intention to lay all of Western civilization's problems at the feet of this project. Of course, we are responsible for our own lives, to the extent we can control them. But where does personal reliance end and maleficent, unnatural cultural influence begin? How would your life and your perspective on the world be different if your family hadn't fallen apart? How would your relationships be different without the influence of pornography, the lies of the Kinsey Report, the constant barrage of cheap sexuality from billboards, television, and every other form of media? Unless you are among the ultra-rich, you don't have the choice of avoiding it. And isn't the avoidance itself an imposition, even for those lucky enough to achieve it? Surely it would take a severe cloistering of our children that itself would be unhealthy. There is a memory imprinted on my mind at the age of 4 that will always be there, and that my mother, if she had known, would have done everything in her power to shield me from. We were in a pharmacy in downtown La Jolla, California, in the late 70s, the furthest thing from a Times Square or a red light district. Scanning the magazine rack, my eyes fell upon the image of a nude woman being fed into a meat grinder on the cover of a Hustler magazine. Much later I found out that there had been a massive uproar by women's groups over this cover, but as young children, how did my generation digest this? This was by no means an isolated incident for myself or my peers. Liquor and convenience stores continued to place detective magazines, depicting tied-up, half-naked women with knives to their throats, next to Playboy and Penthouse magazines, always at eye level, on their magazine racks for the rest of my childhood. This continued until Dr. Judith Reisman brought it to the attention of the Mies Commission on Pornography in 1985. Those who protested against something so obviously harmful were always depicted as uptight prudes in the media, in the same way Tipper Gore and the PMRC were vilified unjustly as endorsing censorship in music. Tell that to the families of the thousands of women brutally murdered and raped in sex attacks during this same period. The day before Ted Bundy was executed, he detailed how this combination of sex and violence had been the key factor driving his rampage against women. In predictable fashion, the media portrayed this as a pathetic last-minute ploy by Bundy to save himself from execution. This denigration of females was by no means limited to print media. From the early 70s forward, hard rock bands like Alice Cooper and countless others were mimicking the torture and murder of women on stage to audiences of drug-soaked and frustrated young men. Every week a new slasher film would be released, mixing sex with the mutilation of young women, as the drumbeat of real-life murder and rape continued to increase in frequency. The examples of manipulation given in the introduction to this work are merely rooms in the vast mansion of horror that has typified our culture for the past 70-odd years. I will be concentrating for the most part on the music industry as the main influence, guiding us like a Pied Piper on a descending path, extending from 1945 to 1994, and made up of 7 genres lasting 7 years each. Each of these genres correspond to one of the 7 principal divisions of individual humanity on a descending scale from spirit or the divine self, down to the basest material level, totally devoid of ethics, morality, or any conception of universal brotherhood. The concept of this septenary division, although existent since the dawn of history, will be alien to almost all of you, and I will provide a simple preliminary explanation that will expand in understanding as you progress through the book. Similarly alien to most will be the concepts of organic and manufactured cycles, and how these cycles are manipulated for the achievement of an agenda. This will also be explained in a hopefully simple manner, where the septenary and cyclic concepts intersect, for a complete understanding of the operation. Although these two occult principles have been explored extensively, most fully during the cyclic 100-year spiritual precipitation typified by Theosophy in the years around 1875, they have never, as far as I know, been addressed in terms of cultural alchemy. As much as those mystical personalities foresaw of our current period, I have never seen evidence of any prediction of the total monopoly that we witness today by one small group of so many centers of power. Finally, the overarching question which should shadow our exploration is this: why is this occurring, and is it a natural part of our evolution? Is it some kind of existential evolutionary challenge? Is it a sifting of humanity? Is it a separation of the wheat from the chaff? Will those who have fallen for this long con have to repeat the grade? Obviously, this work is not for the nihilist, or those who do not believe that there is no purpose to our existence. If you believe we are a biological mistake, or a cancer upon the earth, you should put the book down now. This book was not written as some kind of conspiracy porn. It is the fruit of extended suffering and constant, fearless questioning. It was written out of a deep love of humanity and its endless beauty, a deep love for all of humanity, including the tribe. For I do believe there is a purpose to this conflict, so characteristic of this dark material age, this Kali Yuga. Maybe it is to know ourselves, in contrast to a shadow thrown out to its full length, due to our distance from the light. We can never truly know our real home until we have left it, as the fish has no idea what water is until it is gasping on the beach. One thing is certain: this is not the first time this agenda has been attempted. It succeeded and lasted for over 200 years during the Hyksos period in Egypt, thousands of years ago. It lasted over 70 years in the Soviet Union. The former ended in a violent expulsion told of in the self-serving and distorted biblical tale of Exodus. The latter ended in a long whimper, the tribe making off with the spoils of a destroyed and degraded people. What we are witnessing today for the first time is the formula carried out on a global scale and with the most advanced technology. We are quite literally in a death grip. No, this is not written for your entertainment, but it is my hope that within these pages, along this shadowy path, you will glimpse some of the beauty of humanity, of universal brotherhood, in contrast to the tribal animosity detailed here.